The short blip of load shedding that we've experienced earlier this year might come back again later in the year. This is based on the data that we have found in Eskom's system status reports. We have conducted almost yearly deep dives into Eskom's data for the last 2 years, trying to figure out whether something like a grid collapse, for example, is around the corner. Now, I'm not gonna bury the lead here. We don't think that Eskom is at that point. At this point in time, as we record here in the middle of April 2025. But we have done that latest deep dive into the data to see just how the system is performing. Should South Africans and businesses expect some form of load shedding, whether it's light or intense, in the coming winter months? For those of us in Johannesburg, we have felt a chill in the air, so we're getting ready for colder months coming up soon. Joining us to unpack this matter and discuss her research into this particular sphere is Anlu Keeve. Anlu, of course, a researcher and analyst at the Institute of Race Relations. Anlu, thanks very much for your time being back here on the CRA YouTube channel. So you wrote a client note recently for the CRA. We will link to that in the description below. All of our client notes, risk alerts, and other reports are, of course, available to our premium clients. But just to start off with, there's quite a lot of technical jargon. And the most important term, I think, that we should all keep in mind here is the energy availability factor. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means for the layman and for me as well?
Yeah, of course, your energy availability factor, the word goes, it's quite a general term. You hear it, if people talk about electricity, you hear EAF, energy availability factor. But in its simplest terms, it's essentially just how we measure how much of the fleet is available to give us electricity at any moment. So we've heard that Eskom has a very low energy availability factor, 55%. We're roughly, as of last month, around 56, 57%. So if it is 50%, we'd say that it's half of our fleet is unavailable to give us electricity. It's as simple as it can be.
And then sort of maybe building up from that, what do we look at in terms of numbers, in terms of megawatts that would need to be lost for us to enter some stage of load shedding? Is it possible to calculate 1,000 megawatts per stage of load shedding, 500 megawatts, 20 megawatts? Is there a measurement in that regard?
Yeah, but so I think what is important to look at, if you want to actually have an idea of how far are we in terms of how on the brink is the electricity supply system. There's a couple of indicators actually that we need to look at. It's not as simple as simply saying, okay, we're on the brink and we're going to break down if we have 2 more megawatts that's off from the grid. But we did have a situation at the beginning of April where there was, in a 12-hour window, essentially, there were 6 generation units that was taken offline. And I recall at that time, Eskom said that if there is an additional 800 megawatts that is lost, then we'll have stage 2 load shedding. So there is obviously, you can put a number to it, but I think what we can look at to get a sense of where Eskom is at with their availability and how on the brink we are, if I can call it that. We have a look at almost a more general breakdown of the generation capacity. And for that, then we include what we just explained about the energy availability factor. And we also have a look at their planned maintenance, so their planned capacity loss factor and their unplanned capacity loss factor. And if you almost combine these 3, you get a good sense of exactly where we are in terms of how much electricity is available and how sensitive the generation system is to planned and unplanned maintenance. So to give you a little bit of an idea about this is, I mentioned earlier, our electricity availability supply is roughly around 56, 57% at the moment. And we have our unplanned capacity loss factor at 29%. So 29% of our generation capacity essentially is just unavailable. And then for planned maintenance, so usually what they do is as we go into the colder months, they kind of do more maintenance so that they can prepare for the higher demand and then minimize their planned maintenance during the winter period. And we have that roughly at about 14% of our capacity at the moment.
That 29% you mentioned with the unplanned outage factor, as it were. I know that's not the technical term, just for my own sake. Is that high or low relative to where it has been maybe this last 6 months or the last year? Is it normally below 20%, maybe around 10%? That 29%, just give us a bit of context as to whether that is higher or not.
Yeah. So last year, this time it was 30%. The ideal is to, as I said, to see it decrease going into the colder months. So 29% is not the worst. If we didn't have load shedding last year and we had 30%, we should be okay. But the risk is that if they can't manage to keep their plant maintenance at a minimum, and they can't manage to keep this 29% at a minimum, we needed to go to roughly 23 in the next couple of months so that we can then increase our available electricity to the grid. 29%. When last year in July, just as a little bit of an overview, last year July-ish, the planned maintenance was at its lowest. That was 8%. And as they kind of decreased this, then at the same time, the unplanned outages, that 29%, also reached the lowest level it was in the year. So we needed to decrease so that we don't have load shedding in the winter months. But yeah, compared to last year, this time we're relatively stable.
And then Anlu, just looking at the state of our main power stations, obviously coal-fired power stations. I think some of them, even some of the older ones, perform better than what one would expect for stations of such an advanced age, versus the newer ones like Kusile and Medupi, which never mind being delayed, they don't always perform as they should do. Did you do any work into how the fleet is looking? And the reason I'm asking that is, if I drive my vehicle at 180 kilometers an hour and don't take it for maintenance, if I push any piece of equipment to that point, my margins become smaller and smaller, and which is why I need to do the maintenance and that sort of thing, the servicing, etc. So what do you think in terms of just how the fleet is looking? Did you have any insights into that?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head with running your car to the brink. Okay, so Eskom has a very old fleet. We've really had a problem with, firstly, maintenance, but also actually getting many of our new stations to the point where they actually produce electricity and feed it through to the grid. So what we look at when we look at how efficient we're running our fleets, we call this term as the energy utilization factor. And this will give us an idea of exactly how efficient are we operating our systems. And at the moment, so for last year, I should mention, it's a financial year. Eskom works from March 2023 to March 2024. And for that financial year period, we'll call that 2024, but for that period, it was operating at an average of above 90%. And yeah, that is absolutely horrendous. If you consider then exactly this point that you made, that if you run your aging fleet from near maximum point, then you can't expect anything else than frequent breakdowns. And the result of overutilizing your fleet in this sense, I should mention your aging fleet, because that's the main issue here. It almost forms this self-defeating cycle where the harder you work your fleet, the higher your EUF, the higher your utilization factor. I'm just saying that so that you can connect it back to the measurement and the actual metric that we use. Then the higher the chances of unplanned breakdowns. And yeah, if we look at how frequently Eskom has unplanned outages, then yeah, we can clearly see the full circle.
I think we should also mention, just in that context of higher breakdowns, Eskom has in the past relied so much on their open cycle gas turbines, but those aren't designed to be run 24/7. So, but you also cover that in your note. I wanted to ask you specifically about just some of the breathing room, maybe that things like solar panels give Eskom. Do you think, given how much of that people have installed where they can afford it, obviously, would that give Eskom enough breathing room? Let's say they lost, I don't know, 3,000 megawatts overnight. with the solar panel installations, that sort of breathing room, is that enough for Eskom, or do you think still the priority must be maintenance and bringing down unplanned outages?
We don't see that, well, at least from what I can see, the main responsibility is still on Eskom. We need to make sure that Eskom's own system is resilient. We've also seen the fact that vandalism is still a big problem. So if you look at the actual distribution networks, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's private producers that can feed into the system, but the distribution system is not actually running at full potential. So yeah, I think the risk of load shedding, although private producers does help, solar panels do help to feed in and help to make the system more reliant. I don't think, more resilient, excuse me. I don't think it produces enough yet to actually say, okay, Eskom can fall as a backup to many of these producers. Eskom still needs to make sure that we are expecting the winter outlay closer to the end of the month. So they'll give us a good indication then as well about exactly how reliant they are, or how reliant they're planning on being on private producers going into the colder months. And from that, then we'll be able to more clearly say, yes, private producers are producing enough, or it simply the responsibility still remains on Eskom.
And Anlu, just a final question. Maybe I should have asked you this one at the very start. So we appreciate that people have stuck with us up until the end of the discussion. But yeah, in terms of putting on your Nostradamus hat or peering into the magic 8 ball, your research into the data, into the numbers, we're looking at the winter months. Do you feel confident to put a number to a stage of load shedding? Do you think there will be load shedding in the winter months? Just what is the data telling you? Just so that people have some idea around maybe planning in that regard. I did mention earlier, we don't think a blackout is on the table of possibilities. You need various factors to go into that sort of thing. But just what do you think about the intensity possibly of load shedding?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to forecast a stage of load shedding. I think that would not be wise of me. But I think if we look at the data, what we can see is that there is a rise in unplanned outages, especially in the past couple of months. So if this trend continues, then we will certainly see the risk of load shedding in the winter months. I want to specifically point to the averages, which is quite important if you consider how likely we are, and then also the intensity of the load shedding, because obviously it helps for us to compare it to the last couple of months, the last 12 months. We didn't have load shedding last year. So if we want to not have load shedding, I think that's a good measure of exactly what we need to achieve in order not to have load shedding, or then what will allow or what will push us to the brink of having load shedding. So from April last year until December, those couple of months, outages, well, unplanned outages affected around 25% of our capacity on average. And from April, if you compare that then to the same period for this year, from January to April, the average is 29%. So our availability has definitely dropped, corresponding obviously to the higher unplanned outages. So there's definitely, going into the winter months, we're already on a little bit of a back foot. And a very important indicator, I think, as well, of exactly the intensity of load shedding is you mentioned it quickly, but if we actually have a look at our open cycle gas turbines, and what we've seen is that, so just a bit of context, because this is amazing how much money they actually spend on diesel to run these open cycle gas turbines. From the 1st of April until the 10th of April this year, they've spent 1.3 billion rand on fuel to run the OCGT, as we call it, fleet. And this is roughly, for that same period, the load factor, which in very simple terms is just how much they rely on the gas turbine fleet, was roughly 28%. And here comes the important part. Compare that to last year, it was 7.8%. So that is a very high risk for us. We need to keep that in mind, that they are running the open cycle gas turbines at quite a high load factor. And it's costing us a lot of money. And we obviously need to keep that in mind, because it gives us a good indication of exactly how intense our load shedding is that we can potentially.
No, absolutely. I think despite on the surface things appearing more stable, and I do want to give credit to the Eskom board, to various power station managers for the work that they have done in the last couple of years. Despite that positive work, just the years of neglect, I think, and the years of not doing the right things in terms of maintenance policy, empowering those power station managers, that has come back to bite Eskom and, of course, the economy. So that's what we try and do at the CRA, take a deeper dive behind the headlines into the numbers to highlight these possible future risks so that businesses and citizens can plan accordingly. But on that note, Anlu, thank you very much once again. Much appreciated to those of you who watched. Thank you very much for joining us. Before you leave, if you have not yet done so, remember to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts below in the comment section as well. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.